Hi and welcome. We are AI Sustainability Center. We're here today to comment and analyze EU's proposal on legislation on artificial intelligence. I'm Anna Felländer. I'm the founder of AI Sustainability Center. This is Forsberg Phillips, CEO of AI Sustainability Center, and we're honored to have Stefan Larsson, docent at Lund University. You're also affiliated researcher to AI Sustainability Center. You are Sweden's expert on the social legal aspects of AI, and also your latest publication was on AI ethical principles. So, welcome all. Why are we here? Well, the 21st of April, the EU Commission proposed legislation on artificial intelligence. In September 2020, we saw a white paper, and a lot of these ideas are actually incorporated in this legislation. I want to comment on how value-driven Margarete Verstager was when she presented this. She said that we have to live up to our values. She said that this will spur innovation and EU's competitive power against China and the US. So she underlined that some things that are doing harm to EU values are going to be banned. You will come back to that. So what she also said that it's a pretty big spectrum of AI. It's a broad spectrum. It's AI systems. And also she said there's an urgency and rush to implement this. And with 3 years of work with expert cross industries and sectors with a multidisciplinary research perspective, here they are. And my impression was that there's actually a push and pull because we have this we've been unregulated for a while now. GDPR has not been enough, and now it's kind of complementary. And that's a push. But the pull is that actually an IBM survey shows that 84% of businesses, the top of their minds is trust, transparency, and explainability, because that's what their end customers are demanding. So we are embracing this suggestion, this proposal from the EU. We worked with ethical framework for 2 years with companies and applying ethical principles. So we think that this is about time, right? So I think we have to dig into what kind of implication does this have on organization, and could you tell us about the proposal?
Yes, I can tell you a little bit about the proposal. The whole proposal is 81 plus pages long. It takes some time to digest, but I think there are 3 principles or definitions in the proposal that is very, very interesting for each and every organization. And the first one is the definition of a provider of an AI system or an AI application. And in that definition, what is obvious is that anyone can be a provider. If you let someone else develop an AI application for you, or if you do it yourself, if you are aiming to sell it, or if you are just using it internally in your own organization, then you are, by definition, a provider.
But what if it's just part of a process?
It doesn't matter if it's part of a process, if it's covering a whole process. If it's an AI somewhere within your processes, business processes, you will be responsible under the law or the upcoming regulation, that is. So that is one of the things that I find very interesting with the proposal. And the other one is that they define AI in a very broad spectrum. We are used to discuss AI from a machine learning perspective. But in this new proposal, they are also adding kind of knowledge-based systems, rule-based systems, systems based on logical connections. And also, if you are using statistical methods or techniques.
So it's more like data-driven technology.
It's more like data-driven technology. Basically, any technology that you put on big data sets will be covered by this new regulation. And the third one is that they focus very much on the context in which this application will be used and what its purpose is. So it's kind of a value-driven, in that sense, perspective.
Context-driven, maybe.
Yeah, context, the value, what kind of value does it present? So it's very much connected to, how should I put it, how it will affect society.
The degree of harm.
Well, and also how it will affect you as an individual. That is basically what the perspective is. So that I find very, very interesting. What they also do is that they ban 3 areas for AI applications. The first one is kind of manipulative applications, where you try to get someone to take a decision or to have a view on something that are completely contradictory to how you should have acted or handled if that AI hadn't been there.
It's like unethical nudging.
Yeah,
like
exactly, unethical nudging. We can have several examples of that, of course. But we will leave that for our next session, I think. Another one is that you are using an AI application to identify individuals for some kind of general purpose. You're just collecting information. Mass surveillance. If you're collecting information for some other purposes around a person. So basically applications that follows you around and just gathers a lot of information.
That's what we're used to.
In some ways.
It's awakening. This is awakening.
This is awakening, absolutely. And the third area is where you are using AI applications for a kind of social scoring, what you find in China now, for instance, that if you're not behaving correctly in the eyes of the government, you're banned from certain social benefits or whatever it can be.
She said one exception. It's if you're going to track lost children.
Yes.
That was so strong. It's so value-driven. It's just so taking a stand. I wonder if this has to do with the corona pandemic, which is just arising. And no, she had 3 years of analyzing this. But it's a really fresh start when we see the light after the corona pandemic. That's not the topic today.
No, but it's very enlightening. Another thing also is that they specify 10 areas which they define as high-risk areas for AI applications. And it goes back to this kind of value-driven approach from the perspective as you as an individual. So anything that is contradictory to your human rights, like privacy, non-discrimination, inclusion, autonomy, you name it.
Information.
Yes. That you shouldn't be pushed with a lot of disinformation, particularly. So among these 10 categories, these 10 categories, they will put some extra requirements on you as a provider, and as I said, anyone that develops an AI. And what it actually means is that you need to put a number of processes, methods, methodologies in place in order to live up to the regulation.
But you and me, we know, and Stefan as well, when working with our AI ethical framework, it demands change in governance structures.
Yes.
But I just want your comment on and reflect on the amount of change this will require if you compare it with GDPR.
Yeah, well, we're used from GDPR that we need to do some classification on the system based on what kind of data we're going to collect and also store. and how we are going to protect that data, and we need to have a register that is also in here.
But it goes into EU's database.
Yes, yes, eventually the whole application as such, or the documentation around the application. But what we see here is that you need to have documentation that actually explains how the application came up with the conclusion or the recommendation, in what way, what kind of data has been used to train or
interpretability.
Yes, and all those things.
So it's not like here algorithm transparency. Here's your source code. It's a totally new approach to that the end user should understand.
Yeah, and it's not documentation that you can develop after release, which is quite common in application development. I'm not saying that everyone does that. I know organizations that are sometimes a little bit freer in their documentation processes. And also before you actually release the application, you need to go through a certification process. So either by a notified certifier like Norske Veritas or anyone like that, or you should have your own certification process in place where you swear basically on whatever book you sort of have your beliefs in,
or air.
Yeah, or air.
It could be anything.
Yes,
or nature,
or your children.
Yeah,
that we have complied to the requirements in this regulation.
But also I want to just, because there will be, in every EU nation, there will be a center of excellence.
Yes.
That is responsible for this.
Yes.
So there will be different suppliers of ethical frameworks, but the same conformity and threshold for acceptance in these high-risk sectors.
Yes,
I mean, it's a standardization.
Yeah, it's a
right?
standardization that needs to take place.
Right.
Absolutely, absolutely.
But I think she said it really good, because she had a pyramid with the first top of the pyramid band, and then what you're talking about now, the high risks in the middle, and they need to go through this assessment, AI ethical framework, and then the ones that are minimal or limited risk, they should not be. There should be no legislation, but they should have a code of conduct.
Yeah, they should be encouraged to.
That's soft, but okay. So code of
a code of conduct, absolutely. And I think that it probably is a journey that many organizations will find themselves in. Is that they will start maybe with a low risk AI, but eventually, maybe they need to step up and they move into high risk areas.
But say a retail company, like an online retail company, is that limited, low or high risk, or it's not going to be bad?
Again, it depends on the application, the AI application.
Okay.
So also within an organization, you will find low risk, high risk. Maybe someone comes up with a use case that is banned, but you never know. So you will find all kinds of AI applications.
But to the listeners, what should they do to identify if they're high risk or low risk?
Yeah, well, it's simple. It's not that simple. Stefan will explain that later. But there are some. How should I say? You can. In the simplest ways, explain it is as you have to go through a number of questions when you sort of scope your use case scoping phase, to go through and check if it is sort of a candidate for high risk. So
like we do when we screen.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
The way we screen.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
So Stefan, you have also looked into the proposal for the regulation, and you have identified some areas where there might be a need for some clarification, right?
Yeah, well, thank you. I think you had a good run through it. Anyways, I was thinking about when you talked about it, that maybe the key thing here is the overall picture, in the sense that, I mean, we all know we have been debating the ethical sort of implications of AI, and the center is partly an outcome of that. that we identified a need for, okay, stuff needs to be screened, transparency issues, explainability issues, and such. But I think the key thing here is that this proposal, they had a choice to, should they aim for sectoral sort of regulations, or should they be more leaning towards voluntary schemes? But you chose more of, no, this is a general regulation, not just a sector, but we base it on, the tiered risk levels. So I think that's sort of the signal here, that you need to be aware. Everyone in Europe developing something related to AI needs to be aware that accountability is at the core. So you have to be responsible. Even, like you describing the provider, that sort of concept is really key there. So either if you just use or produce, the provider is sort of saying accountability for many, and part of that is really that the screening process and or sort of documentation and transparency issues. So you need to be able to say how it works, explain how it works, and preferably before something bad happens. So I think that's sort of the big picture is be aware, accountability, and transparency, I think. And I am really keen on seeing how this plays out. I mean, obviously it's not set in stone yet. There will be many debates, and sort of the parliament will have lots of things to say about it, and all the companies and organizations in Europe. But it will also still have implications for the sort of the global debate on governance of AI, in a sense. So it's really interesting to see as sort of the first really dedicated regulation proposal for it, at least.
Yeah, and we've been waiting for this awakening, because even though you have a framework for ethical AI and you conform, it visualizes and kind of put lights on ethical considerations that you need to be accountable for. And it doesn't, when you have this legislation, that's where the work starts, because you have to activate cross-functional teams, and you have to make considerations like there's a trade-off between explainability and accuracy. But what if I want more accuracy because it's a life and death application? I don't care as a consumer if I can have it explained. I just want my life saved. I mean, there's a lot of both ethical and philosophical considerations that I think every organization needs to make a stand, because first of all, most organizations have ethical value foundation of ethical guidelines, but how do we translate this into code? And how do we explain to different stakeholders, and what does that mean in just a broader context? So I think this opens up to more ethical consideration. The more artificial intelligence, the more humaniora awakening questions, I guess.
Yeah, and I also
comment about that. I mean, we talk about high risk and sort of non-high risk. It doesn't say necessarily clearly always low risk, but because I think the small part that notes the voluntary codes of conduct, I think that's something to look into already. I mean, sort of preparing for being more aware of whatever implications one's AI use could have. Like to be more aware of what sort of challenges the use of AI could mean, also for industries that not necessarily deal with high risk stuff. So you don't have to produce, autonomously driving cars. You could also be in retail. So some of the sort of scandals we've seen in the US has not been necessarily really high risk stuff. It's just that it's been the tools are played out in a way that seem to be discriminatory, so people get offended by it, and you could be offended by low risk functionalities as well. So that would and that from a financial perspective could still be like really, really bad. So just looking into this awareness and sort of scan your tools and possible implications, I would advocate for that. Also the sort of code of conduct, so more on industry level than just individual players all over. Sorry for interrupting you, Chris. I just got to So to think about that when you talk about it.
Yeah, and also thank you for mentioning awareness. And I think since Wednesday, I don't know how many phone calls we had from our clients that just ask us, can you come help us to sort of educate our staff and make them aware, to build awareness within the organization, and we're really looking forward to do that. And also one thing that I think is a little bit different from maybe some regulations that I've seen before. My point was that it's not the individual person that develops the application that is responsible. It's the organization. It's the public office. It's the authority. So it's on top level that the accountability lays. So it's not a question for the IT department. It's not a question for the risk department. This is a question for the top management and even board of directors, if you like, within private organizations. So in that sense, it's powerful. It's a powerful legislation proposal.
And we are indeed welcoming this. And we want to thank you all for listening in. We hope we answered some of your questions, but there's, of course, many outstanding. Don't hesitate to visit us at aisustainability.org. And thank you for listening in. Bye.
Bye-bye.